Good morning, it's the 18th of May and it's time for DaviePHD's Mythbusters episode 32. Many things are said about various issues surrounding Scotland, the UK, the EU, independence, money, etc. So in these videos I bust the myths that many people believe. Now many people who voted for Brexit did so as they felt that immigration was out of control and that this affected their employment opportunities and their communities. Now it is certainly true that when former communist countries entered the European Union, that the rise in economic migration to the UK was exponential. But it was not out of control because we were in the EU. It was actually out of control because of UK government mismanagement. Now, whilst EU citizens have always enjoyed freedom of movement for leisure and business purposes, economic freedom of movement throughout the EU was never an unfettered right. At least, not as an economic migrant. And of course, when you think about it for more than the split second that Nigel Farage spoke about it, the actual situation makes perfect sense. The largest country in the EU is Germany, with just over 83 million people. The smallest country in the EU is Malta, with just over 500,000 people. Now, if the type of freedom of movement that was described to you by Nigel Farage was ever possible, then that would mean that all 83 million people in Germany could, if they wanted to, all move to Malta. Now, in fact, it's even worse than that. The EU has a combined population of 447 million people. Prior to Brexit, it was about 510 million. Now, if that unfettered freedom of movement within the EU was ever a thing, then it would have meant that all 510 million Europeans could have all decided at the same time to move to Malta en masse. We all know that that didn't happen. Now, the UK joined the EC in 1971, and obviously that went through changes and morphed into the EU by 1992. In the early years of the Tony Blair government, income levels in most of the 15 member states were roughly on a par, so migration from the three poorest EU members at the time, which were Greece, Spain and Portugal, they joined in the southern enlargement of the 1980s, and economic migration was relatively low, thanks in part to generous EU funding of infrastructure projects in those countries. So economic migration to the UK from the European Union wasn't perceived to be a problem. But in 2004, 10 more countries, 8 of which had been part of the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War, became members of the European Union. In anticipation of the enlargement of the EU, Tony Blair's government took the precaution of asking academics to assess the likely levels of migration from countries in Central and Eastern Europe that were noticeably less well off. Now, the per capita GDP of the 8 former Soviet states was less than half the EU average. Based on their calculations, the report predicted that Britain would receive between 5,000 to 13,000 net immigrants per year averaged over a 10-year period from the new member states. So, very little in controls were put in place. There was no cap in numbers, no skills assessments, no requirement for medical insurance, no requirement for unemployment insurance, no UK address was required and no job offer was needed. A criminal record check, which relied on outdated communist record keeping, was all that was required to gain entry to the United Kingdom. There was a requirement that you needed to find a tax-paying job within 3 months, but it was very, very poorly, hardly ever enforced. But of course, we all know the reality turned out to be quite different. The Office for National Statistics estimates that between 2004 and 2012, the net inflow of immigrants from the new member states was 423,000. That's 4 times what was estimated. We suspect that there are almost 2 million Eastern European migrants in the UK today. Now, if you contrast their experience to what one of my Scottish friends had to go through so he could take up an assignment in the Netherlands for a year, the difference is startling. He had to prove that he had a firm job offer. He had to have a criminal record check. He had to prove he was qualified for his role. His company had to show they'd attempted to hire a Dutch person first. He had to have an address. He had to have medical insurance. He had to have unemployment insurance. And if he lost his job, he had to leave. And this was so he could move from one EU country to work in another. You know, you could be forgiven for thinking that Holland had a points-based immigration system for citizens from other EU countries, whilst still being members of the EU themselves. And Holland were not unique. Most EU countries did the same. So unfettered economic freedom of movement was never an EU construct or idea. Most European countries operated the equivalent of a points-based immigration system, even for citizens of other EU countries. It was actually UK government mismanagement of EU internal immigration that led to this. So why is this important now? Isn't it too late? Well, no, it isn't. The UK isn't going back into the EU anytime soon, but Indy, Scotland could. Now, Indy, Scotland benefits from migration, specifically EU migration. Having learned from the UK's many mistakes, Indy, Scotland could adopt a points-based immigration system within the EU, just like Holland and Belgium and many other countries. So our citizens could regain access to the freedom to study and holiday throughout the EU. Our economy could regain the economic advantages of single market membership whilst maintaining control of our borders. All of these things are possible, and the saddest thing about Brexit is that they always were possible. But they were, as many things have been, mismanaged on our behalf by an inept UK government without Scotland's interests central in its thinking. And this has reared its head again with our unnecessary departure from the EU. Imports down, Northern Ireland on fire again. Brexit has been mismanaged by yet another inept UK government without Scotland's interests central in its thinking. Now there's a bit of a theme developing here. Inept UK governments without Scotland at the centre of their thinking. Now if we stay with the UK, nothing's going to change. Even if Keir Starmer does eventually find his party's compass and defeat the Tories in 2024, a Labour government won't take the UK back into Europe. Even longer shot, the Lib Dems, formerly the most pro-Europe party of them all, have abandoned the whole idea, whilst puzzlingly still trying to claim to be pro-Europe. But all is not lost. For last week, we chose a competent Scottish government that definitely has Scotland and Europe at the centre of their thinking. So let's keep pushing to get them the powers they need to control these matters in the interests of all Scots, even the new ones. Folks, thanks for watching. Please comment on the Facebook page, keep it civil at all times, and share this video with anyone you like. DaviePHD.